Marvel's been pushing a lot of Fantastic Four stuff in the last week, and I think that's because the Fox deal's going through and they're officially going to be announcing that the Fantastic Four are going to show up in the Marvel Cinematic Universe in a couple years. So I decided to do something Fantastic Four related, because they were my first favorite superhero team as a kid, and people finally care about them again. So let's draw the Fantastic Four as dragons. Let's do this. And we're gonna kick things off with my personal favorite member of the Fantastic Four, the Human Torch. He was always one of my favorites. I loved him as a kid because I started reading comics by reading the Ultimate Spider-Man series by Brian Michael Bendis and Mark Bagley, and he and Spider-Man were really good friends in that series for a while. The image I'm using as a reference image was a picture that I just redrew all the time when I was a kid. I always thought it was super cool looking, and I kind of forgot about it. I couldn't actually figure out who the artist was, so if someone knows, please let me know in the comments. Anyway, for Human Torch, I decided to go with a wyvern dragon. That's the kind of dragon that has legs and no front arms. It's just got the two legs and then its wings. And it's a little bit more lean and speedy looking, and I thought that worked well for the Human Torch. And although wyverns, apparently in folklore a lot of the time, don't breathe fire, I thought it was still a pretty cool one for the Human Torch. And personally, it's my favorite type of dragon, so I couldn't resist using my favorite type of dragon to represent my favorite member of the Fantastic Four. I also tried to give him a lot of fiery bits, like fire spewing off his wings and coming out of his head and running down along his spine. I didn't make him breathing fire just because I didn't want to interrupt anything from that jaw. I really like how I ended up making his head look. I think he just looks super cool. It's got a pretty clean sort of outline, and then I detailed it a bit more with the shadowing and a textured brush, and I think that really made it look nice. It's one of my favorite dragon heads I've drawn in a while, and I guess that's kind of a weird thing to have a favorite of, but I do a lot of drawings of dragons and monsters. I also really like how the pose on this one ended up. I had to mess around with the wings a few times to get them just right. I wanted them really spread out and big, because with a wyvern, the wings just always look bigger because the body is a bit smaller and less detailed, you know, without the extra set of legs. And overall, I'm just really happy with how this one's coming together. I think he ended up looking a little bit like Charizard, mostly because of the coloring, and it kind of made me want to do a more realistic rendering of Charizard in my new style. I think that would be a lot of fun. I've got a bunch of different Pokemon kind of episodes planned for the next little while, but I don't want to overwhelm the channel with those, because this isn't just a Pokemon channel. Although I do tend to lean a lot into Pokemon and superheroes on here, I think. Anyway, here's what we got for the Human Torch dragon. Next up, we've got Invisible Woman, and weirdly enough, this was probably the quickest one, but it might also be my favorite. I might like it more than the Human Torch one. And right away, when I thought of Invisible Woman, I was like, okay, invisibility. Let's go with a chameleon sort of look. You know, a creature that actually can camouflage itself a little bit. So even though the reference image I picked doesn't have her actually making herself invisible at all, I tried to use some other reference images to kind of get that, you know, where you see a part of her body going invisible. I did it with that paw that ends up a little bit, to make it that sort of invisible look where you can kind of see it. Sometimes you'll see people do a dotted line for the character. I'm not a huge fan of that. I liked it a bit more, changing the ink around the invisible part to being a light blue, and then I just fade the colors in a bit later and fade in a little bit of shadow, so it looks like her arm is progressively getting more and more invisible. This one also ends up being a bit creepier than all the others because it's got those big round chameleon eyes and they're kind of weird looking. I think this one also is kind of reminding me a bit of a horse in terms of the shape of the body, and that wasn't specifically intentional, but I'm kind of into it. I guess also the knees on the front of the character might be a little bit horse-y. I think horses have those kind of like weird round knobby kind of knees. In terms of the coloring, I end up putting a bit of yellow on her, which is taken from her blonde hair, and I use those as sort of a pattern along the back and on a bit of the arms of the creature, making it, trying to make it a little bit more chameleon-like. In terms of the texturing, I guess I didn't make it so chameleon-esque. I just kind of did what I usually do, but I do think the pops of yellow really make this one stand out a little bit more from the crowd. It's got a bit more contrast in its design. Some of the other dragons I do are a little bit too consistent color-wise, and I think this one works really well because of the yellow-blue combination. And I'm really liking this whole textured brush to do the cell shading for the shadows. I think it really just gives everything I'm doing a little bit of extra texture and detail that I'm not having to work harder to get because I'm just using a brush that has some natural texture to it. And I'm really liking all the work I've done lately in that style. I think I've finally nailed down what my style is going to be going forward, and that feels really, really good. Anyway, here's what we got with our Invisible Woman dragon. Now we're onto the Thing, and I knew this one was going to be one of the more complicated ones texture-wise because the Thing is just all texture. He's rocky and bumpy, and he's got lots of different panels of rock on him, and you know, some people do really small, more detailed ones, some people do them bigger. I really like the reference image I used in terms of the texturing on the character, and I was gonna go for a little bit like that. I take my colors straight off of that version. Again, I'm sorry, I don't know who the artist is. I was looking for PNG files with no background, and those didn't really tell me who did the art for these. If anyone knows, I really love this drawing of him, so please let me know in the comments below. For this dragon, I wasn't gonna give him any kind of wings because he's rocky. I figured, even though, you know, I mean, obviously dragons are fictional, but I couldn't picture a dragon made out of stone having any kind of wings that could make him fly. So I made him a little bit more lizardy. He's just like a great stone dragon. I think that's from something, but I can't really think of it. Maybe I'll think of it in editing.
I'm the great stone dragon. Good morning. I will go forth and fetch Mulan.
Anyway, I also wanted to give him a bit more of a flat face. I just kind of, I think a little bit of a pug dog when I look at the Thing, you know? Just like kind of grumpy, and I mean, he's a bit of a softie on the inside, but he looks like a bit of a grouchy dude, and that pug face I thought worked a lot better, so I flattened his face in a lot more than I usually do when drawing dragons. I tend to prefer the long snout, but I think this works better for the Thing. To give him a little bit more details, I added some rocky kind of spikes to his elbow. That's something I often do with creatures, not specifically rocky spikes, but just kind of any spikes on the shoulders. Or not shoulders, well, sometimes shoulders, sometimes elbows, knees, wherever there can be spikes. I also went through way more layers of cell shading with this one because I needed to add a bunch of different textures, and I was trying to get different levels of detail on the parts where each of the rocky panels separate. And one of the things I actually end up doing is I erase a bunch of the ink lines and then just let the lines from the shadows show you where the different panels are separating. And I think actually taking away that bit of detail makes the piece work a lot better. I tend to do lots of outlining of things, but I think in this case, getting rid of a lot of the black outlines worked a lot better. We didn't need the extra detail when the shadows were doing a lot of the work. Anyway, here's what we got for our rocky stone Thing dragon. Next up, we have Mr. Fantastic. And this one, it was pretty easy to think of a dragon to go with right off the bat, too. I had to go with one of those Chinese dragons because they're long and snake-like, and, you know, Mr. Fantastic's stretchy. He can go really long. I had considered making this dragon actually having its arms and limbs outstretched a little bit, but I thought that just having it with a really long back and tail was good enough to give it a Mr. Fantastic sort of feel. The other thing that gives Mr. Fantastic his sort of look is those white streaks along the side of his head. You know, that all older white scientist dudes have in comics. That makes them look a little bit more smart and elegant, and I decided to put that on the hair on his giant eyebrow kind of thing. So you can see I end up giving his eyebrow a little bit of a separation in color partway through, and I think that translates kind of nicely as his white streaks. Besides that, there wasn't much specifically interesting about the rendering on this one. It was pretty similar to the others. I do a bit of rim lighting, I do the same kind of shadowing. I kind of smooth out the shadow on the body a little bit more than in some of the other ones. And as you can see, I detail the character a lot more at the part that's closer to us, which is something you should always generally do. Farther away stuff, you don't need to detail as much because it's farther in the distance. People wouldn't be able to see the details of it if they were actually looking at this thing. So I detail his head a lot more, his front arms, and then slowly detail less and less and less. You can even see in that back foot, I end up not coloring his claws a different color from his foot, just because you don't need that extra level of information. You want people focusing on the stuff that's up front anyway. Also, last thing, I gave him a yellow eye just to make sure you're looking at the head a little bit more. There's no other yellow on this creature except for his stomach lining part has a little bit of a yellowy tinge to it, but that yellow eye is there to just draw you towards its head a little bit more. Anyway, here's what we got with our stretchy Mr. Fantastic Dragon. I got through those a little bit faster than I thought, so let's do one more. I mean, there's no more Fantastic Four members, but whenever you think about the Fantastic Four, it's pretty much impossible to not also think about their main villain, Dr. Doom. So let's do Doom as a dragon to finish this off. Now for this last one, I kind of picture the Dr. Doom dragon having more sentience than all of the other ones. I mean, Dr. Doom just strikes me as a maniacal genius overlord kind of guy. And I mean, I guess he doesn't just strike me that way, that's who he is. He's the ruler of Latveria. He's one of the most powerful villains in the Marvel Universe. I'm really hoping we get to see him facing off against the Avengers in the near future, because I think he would be a great next step after Thanos. Not that he's more powerful than Thanos, but, you know, he's different enough, and he's kind of got access to a lot of mystical powers mixed with science, so he could kind of almost be like an actual version of the Mandarin in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, not just a, you know, the goofy twist we got in Iron Man 3 where it wasn't really the Mandarin. Anyway, as for this dragon, it ended up looking a little bit cartoonier than some of the other ones, which wasn't my original intention, but I didn't mind that it ended up that way. I knew I wanted to make him look blocky and kind of stoic in an evil way, and I liked having that fist up in a clutching position like he's doing in the reference image, and it's just such a classic villain kind of pose. I felt I needed to have the dragon doing that. I probably could have added a bit of lightning into his hands. That might have been cool. Dr. Doom often shoots yellow lightning kind of stuff at people, but he can really do a whole bunch of other things. This one actually kind of reminds me of an old toy line I used to like when I was younger, but I can't really put my finger on what it was. I think it was some kind of like Mega Bloks Dragons or something like that. Not really sure. Probably silly of me to bring up since I can't remember what it is, but, you know, sometimes I just kind of ramble while these drawings are going if I can't think of anything specifically interesting to say about the drawing. So maybe I should just wrap this up. Anyway, here's the final product of our Dr. Doom dragon. Thanks so much for watching, everybody. If you want more videos like this, be sure to subscribe, because I do lots of this kind of changing some cool thing into some other cool thing, and different drawing videos and lessons on composition, on how to draw superheroes, and all that cool stuff. Alright, everybody, I'm Christian Pearson of Popcross Studios, and I will see you next week.